The lake wore the dawn, like a secret it had promised to keep still. Glassy, pretending nothing ever breaks. I stood on the dock, holding a fishing rod, like it might explode if I breathed wrong, while Harper laughed the way she always did. Bright, unguarded, cutting through the mist and straight into my ribs. We'd been here every summer since we were 12 cheap rods. Skin knees. And an unspoken competition to catch something bigger than our fears. Back then, we measured bravery by how far we could jump from the end of the dock. Now, at 25, bravery felt like saying your own name and meaning it. Harper hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. Golden hair barely contained in a messy bun. Sketched ink stains on her fingers from the night before. That designer's eye that always noticed light first. I hadn't changed in the ways I wished I had. Quiet. Careful. Keeper of a secret that grew heavier every time our shoulders brushed. I could catalogue every version of her laugh, every freckle on her cheek, and yet I would never say the one sentence that lived inside my throat. I love you, Riley, she teased, stepping into my space to adjust my grip. You're holding that rod like it's a grenade. Hiffing us, Silvermine. Warm. Practical. Steady. A simple correction. A seismic event. I froze anyway. Breath stalling the way it always did when she got too close, and I was terrified she might hear the truth thrumming under my skin. This was our tradition. Her family's cabin, outside Nashville. 2 bedrooms that never mattered. A porch that creaked like it remembered us. An old oak that had learned to keep our secrets. She lived most of her life at a sprint. Deadlines. Clients. Mock-ups taped across walls. I lived most of mine in quiet, shelving returns. Recommending novels. Memorizing the sound a heart makes when it stays silent too long. But that morning, even the silence felt different. Harper wasn't filling the air with small jokes or loose stories. She kept staring at the water like it might blink first. When I asked if she was okay, she shrugged. Then, as if saying it too quickly would make it less dangerous, she breathed. You ever feel like you're hiding something from yourself? The words hit like a riptide. I heard my pulse before I found my voice. Yeah, I said, barely above a whisper. All the time. We tried to fish. Or rather, she did, and I attempted the choreography. She baited her hook with the muscle memory of 1,000 summers. I fumbled, tangled, apologized to the air. She didn't tease me this time. She just watched with that quiet intensity she saved for sunsets and good typography, focused, almost reverent. The look made my skin prickle, like a storm building over still water. Remember when you swore you'd catch a fish bigger than me? She finally said, pulling me back to summers that smelled like sunscreen and lemon ice. I laughed, because laughing was easier than naming fear. You pushed me in for bragging? I reminded her. You deserved it. She grinned, then the grin drifted, and something unnameable darkened the space between us. We were so free back then. I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted not to be the kind of person who told the truth only in my head. Instead, I cast my line and watched the sunlight scatter. By noon, we'd caught nothing but our own nerves and an empty bag of chips. The heat shoved us toward the oak. We sprawled on the old blanket that had witnessed every version of us. Girls. Almost grown. And whatever we were now. She dug a soda from the cooler, pressed the can into my palm, and didn't pull her fingers away. The moment stretched until it meant something. Riley, she said. Softer. Like her voice had learned to kneel. Do you ever think about what we could be? My heart didn't stop so much as reorganize itself. I searched her face for the easy out. A joke. A misdirection. A misrätte. None arrived. Her eyes were steady. serious, almost pleading. "What do you mean?" I asked. Though I knew. She plucked at the grass. "I've been thinking about you. How you're always there. How things feel better when you are." Her breath stuttered. "I don't know what that means yet. And it scares me." Years of unsentences crowded behind my teeth. The library of all the times I'd almost said it rattled its shelves. I chose something smaller, safer, honest. "I'm here," I told her. "Whatever this is, we can figure it out." She nodded. But the air between us went heavier, denser, like humidity inside a confession. We didn't fish again that afternoon. We watched the lake mirror, everything we didn't say. When the sun slid down like an apology, Harper dusted off her jeans and announced she was starving, in a voice light enough to pretend nothing had changed. Inside, we cooked college, spaghetti, jarred sauce. Too much garlic. The rituals you cling to when the ground shifts. She hummed. And for a second, I saw us as we'd been before language. Complicated the room, but the weight crept back each glance. A new question. Each accidental touch a map I wanted to memorize. On the porch, crickets stitched the evening together, while an owl wrote punctuation across the dark. Harper braced her feet on the railing and asked, almost to the night, "What if I'm wrong about who I am?" I pictured all the versions of her I'd loved. The one who dared me to jump first. The one who cried when her grandfather passed. The one who stayed up sketching until birds announced morning. "Then you'll figure it out," I said, voice steady. "Hands, not. And I'll be here." Huh? She reached for my hand, small, shaking, electric, and let it go before it could become a promise. Later, in the guest room, ceiling fan, ticking like a metronome for a heart out of rhythm. I named the shift, without daring to say it out loud. She was questioning herself. I was caught in the crosswind. Hope, like fire. Fear like water. Neither willing to give. Morning arrived, scented like coffee, and a second chance. Harper stood at the stove, flipping pancakes like she was auditioning for joy. Sunlight turned her hair to gold, and the kitchen into a cathedral. "Dish duty if you want to eat," she called, smirking. "Only if you stop burning half the stack." I tossed back, grateful for a script I knew. At the wobbly table, her knee found mine and didn't move. We decided to hike the ridge. Same trail. New terrain. Wildflowers nodded in the heat, while cicadas wrote a soundtrack for the part of a story where everything looks the same from far away and entirely different up close. She led, then glanced back more than she needed to. Like she was checking I still existed when she turned away. At the top, the lake spread below us. She handed me a water bottle. Fingerslingering. "You ever think about leaving Nashville?" Casual words. "Deliberate eyes." I told the truth. Sometimes I thought about everywhere, but the library was mine. Our friends were ours. She was the geography that mattered. "I've been thinking about moving," she admitted. "Seattle. Maybe Chicago." The words displaced air. "You'd leave?" I asked. She shrugged. The kind of shrug that wasn't, "I feel stuck. Like I'm supposed to be someone I'm not." The question in yesterday's grass was now a compass. I wanted to ask if stuck was about me. About us. About the thing we hadn't named, but kept walking around. Instead, I folded into easier banter about weather and coffee shops. Her laugh returned. Lighter, but hollow at the center. Like a bell with a crack. We stayed up on that rock long enough to list our favorite books and retell the story about the bear that turned out to be a raccoon with delusions of grandeur. Back at the dock, the water was a sanctuary we didn't deserve, but needed anyway. Sunset painted everything honest. "Can I ask you something?" Harper said. "Anything?" I answered. Foolish and true. Have you ever been in love with someone you shouldn't? The blade was precise. Yeah, I said, throat dry. It's complicated. She didn't press. She took my hand instead, firmer this time. More decision than question, and said, I'm glad you're here. I don't know what I'd do without you. And that night, we watched an ancient movie on a TV that hummed its age. She rested her head on my shoulder like it was the most natural posture in the world. And for the first time, I let the possibility step forward and introduce itself. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. I'm scared of what I'm feeling, she whispered. I turned. Our faces an inch from a different life. You don't have to figure it out tonight, I said. Just let it be. She nodded, pulled back, and said goodnight, like a person standing on a cliff. Measuring the wind, I lay in the dark and listened to the cabin breathe. Something had shifted. It was small, and everything at once. The third day began under grey skies, the kind that press on your shoulders, like unfinished thoughts. Clouds rolled in over the Tennessee lake, heavy and restless. Harper sat on the porch with her coffee, hair tied up, eyes somewhere far away. She looked like herself. Boot Kitty. The Harper I knew filled silences with stories. This Harper let the silence grow teeth. I wanted to ask what was chewing at her. But her question from last night, what if I'm wrong about who I am, still hummed between us. My heart was a storm, but my mouth stayed shut. Then, out of nowhere, she set her mug down with a small thud. Let's go into town. I need a break from all this quiet. The drive was short, but the air felt stretched thin. The small town hadn't changed in years. A cluster of diners. Antique stores. The same bookstore, with a crooked open sign. Harper dragged me inside, her energy suddenly lighter. But I noticed the effort behind it. She flipped through old romance novels and made exaggerated gasps at the covers. Laughing in that way. People laugh when they're outrunning their own thoughts. At a corner cafe. We split freeze across a scratched formica table. That's when her mask cracked. She stirred her coffee like it was a confession. I talked to my mom last night, she said, eyes on the swirling cream. She asked if I was dating anyone. My chest tightened. What did you say? Nothing. She sighed, shoulders sinking. I don't know what's wrong with me. Riley, I've dated guys. It never feels right. I thought maybe it was them. But maybe... Her voice dropped lower. Maybe it's me. I wanted to grab her hand. To say you're not broken. You're not wrong. But instead, I gave her the safer version. You'll figure it out. You always do. And through, her gaze lifted. Sharp. Piercing. What if I don't want to figure it out alone? The words knocked the air out of me. My mind scrambled for a reply. But cowardice won. I pointed out a dog outside the window, pretending it was hilarious. She let me, but the weight of her question followed us back to the cabin, heavier than the storm building above, by the time the first raindrops fell. We were inside, the roof rattling like a drum. Harper pulled out a deck of cards, and we tried to play gin rummy by the fireplace. But she wasn't there, not really. Her hands shook when she set her cards down. Finally, she pushed the deck away, exhaling sharp. Riley, I need to tell you something. Yeah, my pulse spiked. Okay. Her hands trembled. I've been thinking about you. Not just as my friend. More. And it's freaking me out because I've never felt this way about a woman before. Oh, the room tilted. The fire popped. The rain hammered. But all I heard was her. I started to stammer. You don't have to. I know. She cut in. Fierce. Like she'd been holding it in too long. But I want to. I need to. Riley. She swallowed hard. I think I might be falling for you. Oh. Time stopped. I'd imagined these words 100 times. But imagination never prepared me for the rawness in her voice. Her face was flushed. Her eyes wide, with both fear and hope. I wanted to tell her the whole truth, that I'd been in love with her since fireworks lit this same lake when we were 16. But my courage cracked. Instead, I reached for her hand, brushed my thumb over her knuckles, and whispered, I'm scared too, but I'm here. Her breath hitched. She leaned in close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin, smell the faint vanilla of her shampoo. For one suspended second, I thought she'd kiss me, but she pulled back, face torn. I need time. I don't know what this means yet. The ache that followed was sharp but alive. I nodded. Take all the time you need. Oh, that night, the storm raged. But inside the cabin was a paradox. She curled up on the couch, and I laid on the floor beside her. The distance was infinite and non-existent all at once. I stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing, even out. One truth settled in me. Steady as the rain, Harper was worth waiting for. When morning came, the storm had passed. The air was clean, crisp. The lake was glass again, pretending nothing had happened. Harper was already on the dock, knees hugged to her chest. Lost in thought, I joined her, careful not to break the quiet. She finally spoke, voice low. About last night, I've been thinking. I don't know if I'm gay, or bi, or something else, but I know I feel something for you. Something real. My heart soared and sank all at once. You don't need a label, I said. Just feel what you feel. And her eyes flicked to mine, searching. But what if I mess this up? What if I hurt you? You won't. I told her, though I wasn't sure. We'll figure it out together. And she nodded. But doubt lingered at the edges of her smile. That day, we tried to reclaim normal. We fished. We laughed. We told stupid stories. But every glance, every touch, carried the weight of a secret being born as the sun sank, painting the sky in pinks and golds. Harper stared into the flames of our lakeside fire. Her face glowed with something unspoken. Finally, she turned to me, voice trembling. Riley, can I try something? Before I could answer, she leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, hesitant, tasting faintly of marshmallows from the s'mores we'd burned earlier. But it lit my world like a match to dry kindling. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, breath uneven. I'm sorry. I needed to know. Don't be sorry, I whispered, still shaking. I've wanted that for so long. Oh, her smile was fragile, but it was real. Me too. I just didn't know it until now. The fire crackled. The night wrapped around us like a quilt. And for the first time, I let myself believe this could be real, that Harper, my straight best friend, might actually love me back. The morning after the kiss, the world felt both brand new and terrifyingly fragile. Harper moved through the tiny cabin kitchen like nothing had happened, hair in a messy bun, humming while she scrambled eggs. But every time her eyes flicked toward me, something unspoken trembled in the air. She was shy, almost nervous, but her smile carried a brightness that didn't exist before. We didn't talk about the kiss, not directly. Instead, it was there, in every glance, in the way her fingers lingered when she passed me a plate, in the warmth that buzzed whenever our shoulders brushed. I felt like I was floating, but also bracing for gravity to yank me back down. After breakfast, Harper suggested a hike into the woods. "Let's take the old trail," she said, lacing her boots. "The one we used to swear was haunted." The forest wrapped around us with cicadas humming. Wildflowers, bending in the late summer breeze. Harper walked ahead, but she kept turning back as if she was afraid I might disappear. When we reached the ridge overlooking the lake, she sat down beside me and slipped her hand into mine. Her grip was firmer than yesterday. "Almost desperate. I've never done this before," she whispered. "With a woman. I mean, I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "We'll go slow. Whatever you need." "Hell," she nodded. But the conflict in her eyes was clear. Harper was bold in so many parts of her life. But this was territory, without maps. I wanted to protect her, to hold back her doubts. But my own fear pressed in too. What if she changed her mind? What if this was just an experiment? A phase? That night, we cooked dinner, shoulder to shoulder, in the cramped kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing over burnt garlic bread. It almost felt normal, like we were kids again. But when we sat down to eat, her laughter thinned into silence. She pushed pasta around her plate. Her brow furrowed. Finally, she put down her fork. "Riley, what happens when we go back to Nashville?" The question hit like a cold wind. My instinct was to ask what she wanted, but I was too afraid of the answer. "What do you want to happen?" I asked instead, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes shimmered with conflict. "I don't know. I want this. I want us. But I'm scared. My family. My friends. Everyone thinks I'm straight. What if they don't get it? What if they don't get me?" I reached for her hand, aching. "They don't have to get it right away. We'll figure it out. One step at a time." "And fro," she nodded. But doubt lingered. Later that night, she climbed into my bed without asking, curling against me, like she'd been there 1,000 times before. Her breath was warm on my neck, her body soft against mine. I should have been ecstatic. It was everything I'd wanted for years, but fear gnawed at me. What if this slipped away, as quickly as it appeared? Our last full day at the cabin arrived with a sky too blue for the heaviness in our chests. The lake sparkled, pretending life was simple. We tried to fish, but neither of us cared about the lines in the water. We talked instead. Really talked. About fears. About hopes. About the past. I confessed the moment I'd realized I loved her, when we were 16. Fireworks, exploding, above this very lake. Harper's eyes softened. And to my shock, she admitted she'd felt something too back then. But I didn't know what it meant. She whispered, voice breaking. "I'm scared I'll mess this up. I don't want to hurt you." "And Podo, you won't," I said, though I wasn't sure myself. "Just be honest with me. That's all I need." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled me into a fierce hug. It was desperate, almost painful, like she was afraid to let me go. That afternoon, we took the canoe out, gliding across the calm water. Harper paddled steadily, while I watched the sunlight dance in her hair, memorizing every detail. When we drifted to the middle of the lake, she dropped the paddle and turned to me. "I want to try," she said, voice trembling, but firm. "With you. With us. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I want you." My heart soared, but fear anchored me. "I want that too, but only if you're sure." She gave a small, shaky laugh. "I'm not sure of anything, except you." Her words cracked me open. We kissed again, this time longer. Deeper, out there on the water, with the whole world hushed around us. It was fragile, terrifying, and perfect. I knew the challenges waiting for us. Her family, our friends, her own doubts. But as her lips pressed against mine, I let myself believe we could handle it together. The next morning, we packed up the cabin and drove back to Nashville. The car was quiet, our hands intertwined, her thumb tracing circles on my skin. She stared out the window, distant, her thoughts hidden. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but instead, I gave her space. Reality was waiting. Back in the city, Harper dove headfirst into work, deadlines stacking like bricks. I buried myself in the library. But in between, we carved out stolen moments, a coffee date squeezed between meetings, late-night texts that stretched until dawn, a quick kiss in her car that felt like rebellion. Each moment was a victory, proof that this wasn't just a cabin dream. But reality has claws. Harper told her parents. Their confusion cut deeper than she admitted. I don't get it. Her father had said, "You've always dated guys." Their doubt rattled her confidence, left her shaky. Our friends were kinder, supportive. Mostly, but not all of them understood. Questions lingered. Some sharp, some careless. "Are you sure? Isn't this just a phase?" Each one left a mark. I saw her struggling, withdrawing, and I felt her slipping away. Then one night, she showed up at my apartment, eyes red, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She collapsed into my arms and whispered, "I don't know if I can do this. I love you, Riley, but it's so hard." Tears burned my own eyes as I held her. "I know. But love is worth it. You're worth it." We stayed up all night, spilling every fear, every fragile hope. Harper admitted she was still figuring herself out, still terrified, but she didn't want to lose me. And I promised her patience. I promised I'd stand beside her through the storms. That night was messy and painful, but it was also the night I realized love isn't about having all the answers. It's about holding each other while you search for them. Months passed, like chapters we didn't know how to title. Life in Nashville swallowed us. Whole deadlines, commutes, rent checks, library shifts. But in the cracks between all that noise, we built something stubborn. Coffee shops became our sanctuaries. Parking lot kisses became our rebellions. And text messages at 2 a.m. became proof that this wasn't just a cabin fever dream. Harper began coming out in small waves. First to a couple of friends, then to her sister, then, nervously, to her mom again. Each time, her voice shook, but she got through it. Some responses were warm. Some were confused. A few cut her deeper than she wanted to admit. "You've always been straight," one cousin had said, as though identity was a permanent stamp and not a journey. But with every conversation, she grew a little braver. I watched her learn to defend her own heart, even when her voice cracked. And when she broke down afterward, curled up on my couch, tears soaking my shirt, I reminded her that courage doesn't mean you're not scared. Courage means you show up scared anyway. We weren't perfect, not even close. There were fights loud, tearful ones, nights where she pulled away, and mornings when I doubted if I could keep waiting for her to steady herself. There were times I feared she'd decide it was too hard, that being with me wasn't worth the weight of everyone else's expectations. But then there were moments so ordinary, they felt holy. Grocery runs, where she argued about cereal brands. Evenings when she sketched on the floor while I read on the couch. Our silence, companionable. Mornings when she stole my sweater, just because it smelled like me. Those moments stitched us together, stronger than any grand declaration. One evening, Harper showed up at my apartment, her hands shaking. "I told my dad," she whispered. My stomach clenched. What did he say? Her eyes brimmed. He didn't understand. He doesn't know if he can. But I told him anyway. And for once, I didn't apologize for it. Oh, I pulled her into me. Pride and ache, mingling. She was building herself, piece by piece. Even when it hurt, seasons shifted. Leaves fell. Holidays passed. Spring crawled back. By the time summer returned, we were still together, scarred. Tested. But steady. Harper had told more people. She still carried fear. But it no longer swallowed her whole. And me? I had learned patience in a way I never thought possible. Love, I realized, wasn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It was learning how to dance, while soaked to the bone. One weekend, almost a year after that first kiss, Harper suggested we go back to the lake. Just us, she said, her eyes daring and nervous, all at once. The drive felt like rewinding a film. Except the two of us weren't the same people who had left that dock trembling. The cabin hadn't changed, the same creaking porch. The same ancient TV. The same oak tree, standing guard. But we had, that evening, we sat on the dock, legs dangling above the water, the lake stretched before us, calm and endless. A mirror of all the versions of ourselves we had tried to bury, and all the ones we had finally allowed to live. Harper slipped her hand into mine. I'm still scared, she admitted, her voice soft. But I'm not running anymore. And the sun dipped low, painting her face in gold. She turned, smiling through the fear. I love you, Riley. For a moment, the world stilled the lake, the air, even my heartbeat. Then I answered, steady and sure, I love you too. We sat there, hand in hand, the weight of our years pressing against us and lifting us up at the same time. This love wasn't easy. It wasn't polished or simple, but it was real, built on friendship, on fear faced together, on small acts of courage neither of us knew we had until we were forced to find them. Later, as the stars scattered themselves across the sky, Harper leaned against me and whispered, I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I want you in it. Oh, and for the first time, I believed it. Not just in hope, but in certainty. We weren't a straight line. We were a winding trail through storm and sunlight, through doubt and laughter, through fragile beginnings and stubborn continuance. But we had chosen each other, and we would keep choosing each other one day. One truth, one kiss at a time. As the lake held our reflections, I knew the girl who once felt like a secret was now my story, and it was a story still being written.